Welcome everyone to day 3 of Securely's Student Wellness Week 2023, a series of digital events focusing on the most noteworthy issues surrounding student wellness and safety. I'm Adam Smith, the Content Marketing Manager for Securely and host of this year's trio of events. Everyone at Securely is genuinely dedicated to helping to improve student wellness. So this week for us, Student Wellness Week, is one of the most anticipated weeks on our calendar, and so far it's been an incredible week, eye-opening sessions. We kicked things off on Tuesday with a discussion about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And then we followed it up on Wednesday with a hard-hitting and emotional look into how we can get in front of youth and adolescent anxiety, depression, and suicide. Now today, to wrap things up in our trio of events, is a session all about trauma-informed practices and how they can help improve overall student outcomes in our schools. But before we begin, I absolutely need to introduce our guest speaker for today. And joining me today is a CEO, international presenter, award-winning author, and my personal favorite title, I think, of all time, lead dream builder, Dr. Letitia Woodley. Dr. Woodley, it's an honor to have you here, a privilege to be having a conversation with you. And how are you today? How's your week been so far?
Absolutely wonderful. And thank you so much, Adam, for the opportunity to share the platform with you today.
No, it's honestly, it's our pleasure. And I think, some of the information we'll be sharing today will be integral to schools and staff to really make a difference to their students. So it's a genuine pleasure to be here. So before we begin kind of in earnest with the topic, I think it would be great for you to share with everyone your personal story and the sort of the journey that led you to where you are today, because I think it's integral to not just what we're discussing, but why you're so kind of involved in this now and why it's so important to you. So would you mind giving everyone here a little look behind the curtain and your story so far?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story, a little bit about my background. Today, I bring to the conversation my lived experience growing up in generational poverty, with my social circle experiencing intergenerational trauma and my own adverse childhood experiences. And that has plagued my life. And I said, my trauma has been tattooed on my soul in order for me to lead this work and be able to remember and make a difference in the lives of kids who sometimes have walked the same road or had some similar challenges that I had growing up. So a little bit about my story. I grew up in a very small town, Eufaula, Alabama. And I often, when I share my story, I talk about being my grandmother's eighth child because my mom was a teen mom when she gave birth to me. And so grew up in the housing projects, and my grandmother didn't know how to read or write. We kind of walked everywhere we had to go because we didn't have transportation, and just experienced a lot of trying to overcome the stigma of poverty and the pain that kind of comes along with that. When, like I said, we walked everywhere we had to go. So when I went into school, of course, I was behind educationally, and I didn't have parents reading to me at night. At night before I go to bed, and those things. So was behind academically, but I had a sense of resiliency at an early age to try to achieve, wanted to achieve at high levels, and so I was able to navigate and had great teachers to kind of help me along that journey. However, when I got into middle school, I moved in with another family member, which I experienced some sexual trauma. I was sexually abused by one of my family members, and it totally destroyed my life. Like I went from, being this vibrant young lady to experiencing all type of challenges, had to cancel all the activities and things I did at school. And the key factor to the whole scenario was that no educator, no person reached out and said, what's wrong with this young lady? Nobody identified that I was dealing with pain that I was experiencing. It got so overwhelming that I tried to commit suicide. And that's when it was eye-opening that I was really experiencing some deep trauma and that I needed some support. And then my family wrapped around me and gave me the support that I needed. So this is why this work is so important to me. I try to make sure, like I said, this trauma had been tattooed on my heart, that I never wanted a child to feel invisible ever again, and that I wanted to create spaces that every child felt like they had a circle of support that could help them get from where they were to where they wanted to be in life.
I mean, it's both a horrible story, but also a phenomenal one of kind of, like you say, your growth and this journey that led you here. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I know that's obviously, it's very sort of personal and you know, emotional, really. And I think, I mean, you're so right. Having that personal kind of story and that personal link to trauma, and then understanding that you are not the only one that will have experienced that, and how unfortunate that is, and how, and you know, and if you can make a difference to that, then I totally understand why it's sort of fueled your journey and sort of your path. So just for anyone that is kind of watching this and is new to trauma-informed education or trauma-informed practices, can you just start by, I guess, giving us a bit of a definition of that, sharing with us its core principles and what it really means in education?
Yes. So I want to kind of circle back to kind of add to the fact that for the past 2 decades, I've worked to transform systems in at-promise communities all across the United States. But trauma as a term that sometimes is different from place to place. I even had an opportunity to, experience doing some work in Africa this summer as well. But when I think about the termination about what trauma is, it's really a series or events, or maybe one singular event that impacts a person over a period of time. And that experience sometimes lead to individuals being, having an adjusted sense of who they are, a sense of self, harmed sense of understanding of safety, difficulty forming relationships, difficulty managing emotions. So it affects each individual differently. And so when we talk about being personalized in our approach, it's not a one size fits all model when we think about trauma. And so that's why it's so important when we think about building out trauma-informed spaces, that we look at spaces that focus on those 3 pillars of what trauma-informed practices are, and that is creating the sense of safety, and not only safety for physical safety, but also psychological safety. Thinking about building out those spaces for connectiveness, building out those communities that are inclusive, where kids have a sense of belonging, that they are feeling like they're able to build those relationships with adults and and with their peers, and ability to be able to manage emotions, learning those coping skills necessary to kind of communicate and cope with the different challenges that kind of come along with life.
Yeah, what's wonderful. So obviously this is our 3rd Student Wellness Week session, and our first 2. It's amazing how much overlap there is with all of these things. And I think your reference to feeling safe, your to being connected, that sense of belonging. It's been kind of in all of these conversations that is just so important. And this, one size does not fit all. And unfortunately, I think sort of historically, we've maybe thought more that is the case, that there is one particular path, there is one particular way to create belonging, there is one particular way to deal with every kind of scenario. Yeah. When in fact, also everyone that we deal with is an individual. They all have their own stories, they all have their own, as you say, their own traumas, their own issues to deal with. And I think it's wonderful that there is now such a focus on, well, let's actually sort of dig in deeper to individuals and understand what do they need, what do they individually need. There's a few other things I want to touch on as well, but we'll come back to those shortly. What I would love to know, so you've had experience as a school administrator.
Yes.
Just from your personal experience, how do these trauma-informed practices, how do they improve student outcomes? What have you seen, and why is it that they are so kind of impactful and sort of efficient, I suppose?
Well, I can tell you this. I've had great success throughout my career and learned a lot of lessons in working in some of the most at-promise communities, primarily in Georgia and in Missouri. And I think the National Child Trauma Stress Network really outlines those 10 key elements to building out a trauma-informed space, or trauma-informed schools, or a trauma-informed system for that regard. And it really focuses on identifying and assessing traumatic stress, treating traumatic stress, teaching trauma education, creating trauma-informed environments, being culturally responsible, evaluating and revising your discipline practices. All those are key elements in building out these trauma-informed spaces. And what we do know is when we look at the leading indicators that impact student achievement, it is discipline, attendance, and the adults that that we're working with the students, their attendance and their commitment to the work. And so I dedicated all of my work around these pillars and building out these key spaces for our students to be successful. So an example. So one of the great speakers that you guys had earlier this week was Robert Abosa. He was one of my superintendents that kind of allowed me the space to kind of lead some of this work in the state of Georgia. And one of the schools, yes,
right, I didn't know that.
One of the schools that I had a great opportunity to lead this work was actually an alternative school that I had graduated from 20 years prior. And so I had a vested interest in the success of this school, knowing that majority of the students that came through those doors had experienced some type of trauma. Their whole experience, and the reason why they were in that alternative environment, and they were not doing well academically, attendance was an issue, behavior was an issue. So they came with a total package of issues and concerns. And so when we began to implement these pillars, when I got to that school, they had a 17% graduation rate. 17%. You heard that correct. 17. And so I knew I had a lot of work to do in this particular area. But what we began to do is we began to put in parameters or strategies to addressing and identifying traumatic stress. We had one-on-one meetings with every family, every student, to kind of identify what are the issues and concerns that plague them. We developed wraparound services where we're able to provide those, when we met with those students, be able to provide them with counseling if necessary, focusing on anger management, those different pieces that they need to learn, those coping strategies. All those different pieces we begin to put in place. One of the most fascinating things I love to kind of talk about from this work was one of the things that I did for every new year when students would come in, I would do what I call a believe ceremony, where students write down all the things that kept them from being successful in the past. We will have a funeral for those things that kept them from being successful. And then we will plant seeds for their future, and they will watch them grow over the years. So we had a symbolic ceremony to say, guess what? Although you've experienced all these challenges in your life, we're here to support you. We're here to make today be a new start, and every day to be a new start here at this particular school. And from that, just putting those pieces in place, developing those trauma-informed communities, I was able to take that school from a 17% graduation rate to a 75% graduation rate within 4 years. All of the academic indicators showed positive. Students that, had experienced nothing but failure began to achieve at high levels. Discipline was non-existent as far as, major discipline problems at the school, all because we were intentional about making sure we were meeting the needs of students and creating that personalized environment to make sure we were able to address the trauma that they were experiencing in order for them to be safe enough, to be vulnerable enough, to be open enough to allow us to do the education part that's necessary for them to thrive on their path in their journey to success.
I mean, that is a enormous jump. That is incredible, especially in such a short span. You would think, 17%. You would think maybe it would take 10 years, and even then maybe not get it to 3/4. So, so proof there, that this can work, especially with a dedicated approach, with consistency and those sorts of things. And I think, going back to your kind of 3 pillars of trauma-informed practice, safety and connection were your first 2, but managing emotions, I think, is one that is really interesting to me personally, but also to Securely as a whole. We've started to really kind of branch into this idea that we can't just create these products or these solutions or whatever it might be without considering individual students. We need to understand how individual students are feeling it. As you say, it's not a big net. We can't just do something that kind of covers all and will therefore help every student. So one of our products, Rhythm, allows the students to kind of own their own emotions, and we do these things called wellness check-ins, where just for literally for 2-3 minutes at the start of a lesson or of a class or whatever, how are you feeling? Ask them how are they feeling, and they're with it like little emoji reactions. So it's appealing to like the young children, and they can react with how they're feeling. They can express themselves and start to actually think about some of that emotional vocabulary, to become literate with their own emotions in a way that they hadn't before. And I think from what you're saying, that even those symbolic practices where you are giving them ownership of these things that are intangible. Emotions are intangible. They don't know how to deal with that, and you are giving them a way to tangibly remove themselves from that and to grow and to give them something else to focus on. And I think that's just such a beautiful way of doing it, and clearly a successful one as well. So I guess I'd like to learn more a little bit really about the relationship between emotions and trauma-informed practice. So something that you are kind of, I guess, an expert on as well is social emotional learning. So what is the relationship between social emotional learning and trauma-informed education?
Yes. So when we think about a pie, right, building out trauma-informed spaces is the whole pie, right? So, and when you look at social emotional learning, it is a piece of the pie. It is that tangible skills necessary for students to learn how to deal with their emotions. And when we look at the different components of social emotional learning, we're looking at that self-management. We're looking at that, how do we build relationship? We're looking at building that vocabulary. Looking at all those different skills necessary for kids to be able to say, hey, I'm hurting, and this is why I'm hurting, and what I need in order for me to be okay. Is that self-regulation to be able to say, I'm upset right now. I feel my body chemistry changing, and so therefore I don't want to respond in a negative way. So this is how I'm going to respond in lieu of that. One of the sad things about how we look at managing emotions or discipline, for that matter, in schools is we know that kids 1 + 1, we've got to teach them those skills, right? But we believe that kids are little adults, and they should come in and already know how to manage their emotions. And social emotional learning provides you with those skills that you need to kind of teach them to do so. I like to say that, as an adult, we can have a bad day and we can take a day off work, right? We can say, oh, today's not my day. I'm just not, I'm having a bad day. I'm not going to come in today. But kids don't have that choice, right? They don't have the choice to say, hey, I want to call in to school today. And so they show up in pain. They show up no matter what. I never forget, as a principal, I had a student one day that was robbed on the way to school.
What?
Right? So he was robbed on the way to school, came to school, was in class, and so I'm like, I would know if I got robbed on the way to work, I would probably need to take the day off, right?
I was like, I'm laughing. It's horrific, but the thought then of coming in and cracking on with math or with studying some literature or whatever, it's the last thing you want to do.
Exactly. And so we know that trauma, adverse childhood experiences, affects the developing bodies and brains of children. And so what we have is students that are there physically, but mentally they're not there. And so they're dealing with that rapid fire going on in their brains, those rapid thoughts, and not being able to calm their brain enough in order for them to engage in the work. And that's what social emotional learning does, and the overall scope of creating those trauma environments that does for kids. It creates that space to quiet that brain in order for it to be opened and ready for learning.
So so interesting you say this. So I recently did a emotion coaching course, and as part of that, like probably sort of like the big chunk of it was understanding that there aren't just 5, 10 emotions. There are, I think there was like 88 or something that they broke it down into. And I'm a grown adult, and there were some things in there that I hadn't realized that I had been feeling, or that's hadn't really been able to determine what that was. Now, if I can't do that as a grown adult, and someone who has had a great upbringing and not really had any major traumas to speak of, but if I cannot do that, then how are we expecting our youth to be able to do that? They, as you say, they're learning their basic academic things. They've got a lot to focus on already. Add to that the fact they're growing up. Add to that all of the trauma. They might think they're sad or angry, but actually it's far deeper than that, and there is something more meaningful. And I think you're so right in that if we can dig into those things, and if we can give them that self-management, that self-awareness, and again, responsible decision making as part of social emotional learning, because they need to be able to make those choices and be able to say, you know what, actually I'm not in a place to learn right now. And again, with our rhythm product, it gives the teacher at the front of the room, they can see, it'll flag that somebody is just not feeling, they're not tuned in right now. They are exhausted in some way, they are distracted in some way, they are just feeling a little bit, one of the options is meh. They're just feeling a bit meh. And it's very important for us to know that. And okay, that could just be a one-off. They might have just had a scuffle in the playground, they might have just had a bad night's sleep, or something like that. But what if that becomes a trend? Correct. What if that is every check-in? What if that is every day? And as you say, and then that starts to affect, it can affect things like their attendance, their behavior, and then it goes one of two ways. Either they get labeled as, oh, that's a problem student and they're just going to cause trouble, or you can go this way and you can say, well, okay, what's causing that? What's the root cause of that trauma, that problem of not showing up in the right mindset? And I think once these tools kind of all together, and again this approach combined with these tools gives them that opportunity to really to own those emotions themselves, give them a little bit of autonomy. And I think that's so important, because we don't, certainly when I was in education, we didn't teach these things, and I'm not sure it's widespread enough at the moment. So I think this is such an important thing to be introducing to people. Okay, let's say for the schools out there that aren't implementing this, how can they determine if trauma-informed approaches are the right kind of approaches for them? How do they decide if it's a good fit for their community?
So what we do know based on research is that 3/4 of the American and probably around the world have experienced some type of trauma. Right. And so it's not so much of us trying to be an investigator to kind of really dig deep and find out what kids have experienced trauma and what students have not. We know that all students benefit from a trauma-informed environment, right? All students benefit from social emotional learning. So there's not a community that is immune to, because we know no matter what these, race, social economic status, everybody, trauma is not targeting certain particular groups. Everybody is an equal opportunity type of situation for people to experience things that are devastating in their lives. But one of the tools that I think was an impactful tool that I was able to use during my journey of working as the Missouri Model for Trauma-Informed Practices, that guide. It's 12 indicators. And on those indicators, it kind of talks about pre-trauma aware all the way to trauma-informed. And it provides an overview of the different elements that we talked about a little bit earlier of trauma, the elements of an effective trauma-informed system. It allows a group to be able to say, okay, where or do we fall in this continuum? And you're able to lean in to kind of say, we may be pretty good as a team or as a school in this particular area, but these are some areas that we still probably need to kind of work on to be a more inclusive, a more exclusive community, and create more wraparound services for our students. It's a powerful tool to use to be able to just kind of get a glimpse of where you are to kind of see, where you are and where you're trying to go. Now, what I do want to warn against is you can't wake up one day and be like, oh, we're trauma informed. It doesn't work that way. And so there is a logic model that kind of goes along with it. First there's a change in knowledge, a change in practice, a change in culture, a change in policy, and then a change in system. And so it starts off with that change in knowledge. How do we make sure that we have our educators become aware not only of what trauma-informed practices are, but understanding their own trauma? One of the sayings I like to say is you can't take a child to a place of healing that you're not willing to go through yourself. So one of the important factors is, implementing professional learning that focus on understanding your own trauma and the own lens that you have through which you see the world. And, and introduce those components of self-care for the staff, for them to be able to say, okay, I have space, just like we give space to kids, give space to the adults, in order for them to be able to practice that self-care that they need in order for them to be their best selves, so they can be everything that we need to be for kids. So I would say a starting point is to develop a tool, similar to the Missouri model, to kind of identify where you are in the continuum and where you want to go. You're not going to be able to tackle all 12 elements of trauma-informed practices in 1 year. You might want to look at 2 or 3 things that you're interested in. But the most part is just taking the time to assess, where are we? What is the needs that are still here? What's working well in our area? What's not working well? And how can we be the best that we need to be for the students that we're trying to serve?
I think what I love that you touch on there as well, that kind of the step by step, because I think there's a misconception that it's as simple as one day saying, okay, fine, we're just going to do this. We're just going to go straight to trauma informed, like stage 4 of the whole thing, right? And of course, the problem with that, as you say, you have to have all of those foundations in place to make sure that it stays afloat. We had a webinar that I hosted towards the end of last year where we were talking about teacher burnout, and it's rife all across the US, all across the UK. Yes. And I was a teacher previously, and I think it's, I've not come across a teacher that doesn't want their students to not just do well, but to be well. Yeah. Everyone that I work with, everyone that I know that's been a teacher, there's a lot of ex-teachers at Securely who still want to make a difference, but we're pushed out of the classrooms for different reasons. And I think for me, I wanted to be there for all of my students, but of course you got your resources to think about. Do I have the time? Do we actually have enough staff to cover this? And that's it's a problem all across schools to this day. But I think what you're saying as well, making sure that the teachers are in the right place, or the staff, or the student service teams. Yeah. Making sure they're in the right place. But when you start to make these actual changes to your overall approach, not just a quick mindset shift, but actually giving them the right sort of training and knowledge, understanding kind of how sensitive some of this can be, and that it's not something you're going to be able to master in a day or a week or a month. And then also learning how to respond to those things, and what are the steps that you're putting in place. Yesterday we were talking about getting in front of anxiety, depression, and suicidality in children. And Dr. Wilson from yesterday, he had this point about it's needing to understand what's happening behind the surface. These students that aren't showing it visibly. How are we finding that out? And I think putting these steps in place, making sure you have it all in place, so you don't have to just be reactive. You can be proactive. And I love something like this. I love this Missouri model because I think it shows you that it's not just a simple one and done. You've really got to as a community agree that this is what you're going to do. And I think that's so clear from what you were saying in your sort of own personal experience, that this sort of thing can really work. I do have a question. You said that trauma isn't just for some people and not others, that sort of everyone experiences it. And I agree with that. But again, there are going to be some schools in areas where, trauma is less, it's not so rife. And would you say that it's beneficial to all communities then, trauma informed practice? Do you think this is good? This is the good for areas that are very well off and very sort of, safer communities, or whatever you want to call it? Do you think this is still important for them?
Yes. So what I do know is that we do understand that trauma community trauma in certain areas is rapid in certain areas that, especially areas that are, dealing with high poverty and things of that nature. But what we found, especially during the pandemic, a lot of our more affluent schools and more affluent areas, more high performance schools, their students that were post-pandemic came to school dealing with so many other extreme anxiety and stressors and all types of things. And so we ended up having to deploy more services to those particular schools. And so the same approaches were necessary. And so when you create a trauma-informed environment, everybody wins, right? Everybody wins. Think about it. A child that knows how to manage their emotions, quiet the thoughts down in their brains, ability to communicate how they're feeling. I mean, what child wouldn't benefit from that? Being able to create those spaces. So it's not so much of, I would say some areas it is absolutely necessary. It's a tool that I use because I've worked in most Ed Promise communities and I've seen the benefits of it. But having the ability working as an assistant superintendent and having the responsibility for schools of all different economic statuses, all different achievement levels, all different, races and ethnicities, what I found is creating a systematic approach across the entire school district of this trauma-informed approach assist in raising the student achievement levels of all students, regardless of those backgrounds.
The pandemic is such a great example of why having these things in place for everyone is important, because you cannot predict when trauma will strike. I should say, even in the most affluent areas, in the more well-to-do areas and schools, districts, it could still happen to anyone at any time for any reason. And it's almost like, putting in a fire alarm, a smoke alarm after the fire started. You want to have it in place already, so that you know when the fire is starting. And I think the pandemic is a fantastic example as why, maybe there are some people watching this, some schools and districts out there that don't necessarily think they need this. But they might do, and when that comes, it's much better to have the systems in place, the structures in place, than to have to start scrambling for it kind of at that stage. So I guess that brings me to a bigger question, and probably a question that people watching this would be really interested in. Where can counsellors, teachers, and school staff begin? Where can they start this process? What for you are those initial steps to get themselves on this ladder towards, going through those stages or whatever it might be? What to you is the starting point? What practices can they use? What tools are available? How can they start to introduce it into their school?
Okay. So one of the things that I would say is for we start with a change of knowledge, right? And that is educating, number one, yourself as the person that is going to be that advocate for change that's in your school or in your district. Educate yourself on understanding adverse childhood experiences, taking courses like mental health first aid, really and truly having a understanding of what is going on and how to approach and how these different approaches can have an impact on the students that you serve. That's number one. And then number two, then you want to start having conversations, right? A lot of times, a lot of things happen, and you kind of talked about that. I love the analogy of the fire alarm, right? We are very reactive in education sometimes. And it comes when, one of our students commits suicide or trying to tip to commit suicide, or, we see some violence that happened to our community, then we respond. But instead, I think one of the, things that I'd say is a lot of time as adults, we talk to other adults about what we need to do instead of talking to kids. Having conversations with the students about what they need, what they're going through, having those one-on-one conversations. I had a one-on-one meeting with every child and every family before they stepped foot in a classroom. right? And so being able to have those conversations to assess, well, little Johnny, lost his father last year. Do we have a grief program in our school? Different situations. This student is dealing with anger management issues. This student is dealing with this. This family is going through a divorce. So you have a clear understanding of those are traumatic events that's happening in that child's life. And you're able to kind of pinpoint what are the needs that are currently in my school. One of the other pieces that's so important to do is what I call an equity audit, to kind of identify, what are you seeing? What is the data saying? Do we have students that are, a lot of them are being absent? That may be an issue that we need to address. So we need to kind of have a, pinpoint to find out what's going on. Do I have a lot of discipline issues in my school? Or is it just a certain number of students or certain particular students that are constantly having discipline issues over and over again? Let's dig back and peel back the onion to kind of figure out what's going on. So assessing what's going on in your school, developing that knowledge base for yourself, and then begin to have a conversation about creating what I call treatment teams within your building. I love the resource that you talked about with Rhythm, and being able to put those things in place where you're able to, on a quick, something really quick, to find out the student's emotions. You're able to have a data tracking system that you can be able to utilize to say, I have a particular group of students that are trending negatively about their emotions on a regular basis. What do we need to have put in place in order for us to address those particular needs? So I would say, start being the heartbeat of your school, being able to identify and understand what's happening, create a treatment team, administrators, teachers, and even students to kind of talk about what's working. Do a culture and climate walkthrough in your building. Listen how teachers are talking to each other, how teachers are talking to students, how students are talking to each other, how students are talking to the teachers or the educators in your building. Is it a community that is inclusive? Are there students? Go into the lunchroom and see how the students are sitting. Are there particular students that are sitting by themselves and don't have a sense of connectiveness? Being able to do those evaluations are going to be key in order for you to be able to determine what's needed in your building, in order for you to get the benefit that you need in order for students to be thriving in the spaces that you're serving in.
I love it. And it all sounds like it's so manageable once you start it in sort of into process and you start building those systems in place. You mentioned about trends and the data and stuff. And I think a big thing for us at Securely, we obviously started off as a web filtering company. We were just making sure that the internet was safe for young guys, right? And then we started to realize that actually, there's so much more because students are now on their tech all the time. They're on their tablets or their computers or whatever, even in the classrooms. That that's a great place for us to find out, because they communicate with their screens, with their friends through that. Even there's a saying that they'll often maybe lie to their parents or teachers, but they won't lie to Google. And so when we can see these, we have Securely Aware that flags alerts for troubling or alarming kind of search terms or things that have been typed into documents or wherever. And all of our systems will communicate, and they will create a wellness score for the children. So it also allows you to have the conversations with the right students at the right time. And I think one of the biggest kind of troubles we come across is that a lot of schools say that they are under-resourced, they're understaffed. They maybe don't have the time to go, as you say, to speak to every single student, every single family. In an ideal world, of course we would, but some of these schools don't have that. And I think that's where this technology comes in. It gives you that extra resource, that extra time, because it lets you dedicate the time to the right student at the right time when you need to. And of course, as you begin to build, perhaps you'll become more efficient. Perhaps these things will be easier, but all of these things work together. And you mentioned as well, even those climate walkthroughs, a great idea, because you are able to actually get on the ground and see what's happening that isn't being put into the computer or into Rhythm. And we have a product called Securely Observe, where you can just, it's the same thing. You just add observations that you've, little Johnny was sat on his own today and has been actually for the last couple of weeks. And suddenly that goes into the system, and it goes alongside what we've registered with what their wellness check-ins on Rhythm or what they've flagged, what flagged alerts they've given us through Aware. And we start to get a bigger picture then of who needs that help and where best to go. I think we're coming to a close here with this. Oh, go on. Sorry. No, go on.
No, I was saying that is powerful. I'm telling you, if you don't have a system like Securely in your school system, you need to get one immediately, because it provides so much information for you to be able to make informed decisions about just in time approaches to be able to meet the needs of students, being able to identify if a student is, Googling information about self-harm or hurting others, and all those different pieces. You're able to know how to target, your time to make sure that the students that need the most love is getting the support that they need. And so I just implore you to find the resources. When I look at a budget as a school administrator, or even a district administrator, your budget should align with your priorities, and your priorities is to make sure that our students are well, right? And so it should be a priority that we have a system in place that provides you with this information to make sure that you're creating those safe and secure environments within your school system, not only physically safe, but like I said before, psychologically safe as well.
Yeah, and that's just so important, isn't it? Because again, I think in the past we've been so focused on a physically safe environment that we don't necessarily always consider what goes on under the surface. And it's just as important, if not maybe more so. It's been wonderful talking to you today, and I feel like there's just so much knowledge and sort of brilliant ideas going on with you and what you do. So first of all, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for being here today. If anyone watching this wants to learn more, or wants to get in touch with you, or wants to kind of I guess find some advice or any resources, where can they go? Where can they go to find you?
Well, I'm excited to support any work that you're doing. Anybody that's interested in, having more information about developing a trauma-informed approach. What I do now, I am the CEO of Dynamic Achievement Solutions. I travel the globe creating trauma-informed environments. So I support schools, municipalities on how to create trauma-informed communities. So I can be reached out on any of the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all at Dr. Letitia Woodley. So I'll be more than happy and willing to support you in any way that I can.
Amazing. Well, I feel very privileged to have had you here, and this has been such a lovely conversation. So thank you for being here, and thank you to all of you as well watching for joining us for Student Wellness Week 2023. As I say, if you're watching this, that means you are watching one of our on-demand videos, and we have the other two sessions also available on demand. We talked about DEI and B in our first session, and I think as we've proven here today, that sense of belonging is so important. So do go and check that one out as well. And we also discussed about how to get in front of young people, adolescent and youth, anxiety, depression, and suicide. A very hard-hitting but very important conversation. I'd love you to check that out as well. That does bring Student Wellness Week to an end, and what an ending. What a way to wrap things up. We will be back, no doubt, in 2024 with another round of these discussions, but do keep in touch with Securely throughout the year, because we have these sort of webinars ongoing throughout. We're available on all the social medias as well. Just look for Securely or Securely Inc., wherever you prefer to do your social media. And we hope to see you again soon. Dr. Woodley, thank you again very much for being with us. Hope we can have a chat again soon.
Thank you for the opportunity.